Um, and because this is a long one, and
Oh yeah.
I'm slightly worried myself because I'm like, this one's so difficult for me in a certain sense. So I'm, interested to learn from you guys as well and your observations. I've read this several times over the course of 15, 18 years or oh man, maybe like more like 20 years of being an objectivist or reading this stuff. And this is such an interesting one. And I wanted to start. So Ayn Rand, her first opening question is what kinds of objects may be properly classified as works of art? What are the valid forms of art and why these? That's that's what this whole thing I think is supposed to be about, right? And then she goes on to the longest essay I think in the book about trying to approach that question. Um, my first question to you guys is the broadest sense is so she answers it at the end, right? Do you think question I want to ask is like, do you think she's right? Is it the right approach? Um, like I said, I'm worried about this one because it's so hard for me to even approach. But what do you think she's trying to do with the different examples she has in there? I don't know if this is a good question to start with, but
Yeah, I can jump in.
yeah, please.
So I mean, thinking about this in terms of induction of like where do these concepts come from in the first place? Where in reality is she delving into to explain any of this? And it's the reality, I think, of the fact that human beings have a conceptual consciousness, but deeper than that, on a perceptual level, we've got our five senses. And she does talk about, or she relates how the five senses, how they relate to each art form. So painting, you've got sight, sculpture, you've got sight and touch, music, you've got hearing, um, and so on. And of course, the performing arts is the object of an actual person who is like dance. Um, and that's that sight, hearing, and tactile sense, touch. Well, you not necessarily touch, but tactile. Um,
Sure.
uh, so anyway, so this
Yeah.
she's deriving all of these concepts from what she understands about a human being's ability to grasp reality and then she talks about how she defines I think in the previous one, Art and Sense of Life, is that what art is. It's a metaphysical recreation of an artist's value judgments. But she gets into it, yeah, you're right, Kirk, that it sounds like she's trying to validate especially in music, her hypothesis in music and how one takes it in and what it all means. Um, and so yeah, she's getting into the specific art forms and trying to validate them and understand them in terms of a rational context.
Absolutely. Yeah. Michael.
Uh,
That's interesting.
I think the major through line through this for the uh, side of cognition is integration. Integration
Mm.
in art, integration in thought. But she talks about those various visual art forms as, integrating from perceptual data to some sort of conceptual understanding. In literature, it's starting with concepts and getting to a perceptual image. Um, in the uh, performing arts, she talks about integration to the primary arts, and that the acting should integrate with the drama, dancing should integrate with the music, and within music, she's talking about integration again of like notes adding up to a harmony, and that calculation is what you get enjoyment out of. But I mean, she says uh, on page 47, we must remember that integration is a cardinal function of man's consciousness on all the levels of his cognitive development. And on 54, integration is the key to more than music. It is the key to man's consciousness, to his conceptual faculty, to his basic premises, to his life.
So one of the early premises she's emphasizing is something we talked about before, but I think it's important for us to keep in mind is that in Rand's view, as opposed to a lot of people in our world, and even in her world in the 60s, right? This is late 60s or early 70s. When is this one? 71. Is that art is not a frill, right? It's not like what she's talking about in terms of art is not just some fun, entertaining thing that kills a couple hours. That there's something deeply needed, and not even just needed, but it's needed in the sense of um, it's the she calls it the art teaches man how to use his consciousness, right? It shapes in a sense, or with your free will, in line with it, you're doing it as well, but it's the deepest thing in a sense, in the sense of most important thing to the development of a human mind cognitively and the deepest levels. Well, I keep saying deep. And so she has this defense of it throughout, that I think is very important. And I'm going to ask, so I'd like to go through each of the arts at some point, but I wanted to start by once again challenging Rand and an argument that objectivists have had, or I remember we used to have these arguments intensely when I was younger, over and over and over again. But I think as I'm getting older and learning more, I'm starting to see something important here about Rand's approach, and that is the is photography art question. And I'm just out of curiosity, we have some people who've been in the objectivist movement for a while. Who has had heated discussions about this question? Is photography art? Has anybody had, just us two? Nobody else?
Well, I mean, not heated, but
Or intense?
maybe
Yeah,
long,
it's just
long
Intense.
discussions.
That's what. Okay, that's
it
another
may
way.
be
But,
easier to ask who hasn't.
well, that's yeah. So like, I didn't mean like necessarily contentious, although with me it was contentious. But so that's why I said that, I think. But like just passionate, excited, long discussions about this question.
Oh yeah, the threads on the old Usenet groups were epic.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so fascinating to me now looking back at that question. So let's dig into it.
Especially
Let's,
especially as photography has evolved.
sure.
Um,
That's what I wanted to, so please, Mark, I want you to answer this. You start off the conversation, what I'm going to say. So like,
uh,
I want us to finish this argument once and for all.
okay.
We're going to solve this problem for all objectivists now and into the future. What is Ayn Rand's argument? And what is the general contention in quick summary as possible you can do of what objectivists have been, or people interested in this question, been debating? So Ayn Rand makes a statement. It's not even that big a deal in the whole thing, really. And then there's massive, as you said, Mark, debates online, and we've all been in long heat or passionate discussions about them. Because we're going to finish, we're going to solve this problem today.
Her
I
answer
can go,
is
or
sorry.
oh,
I
okay.
thought
Yeah, Mark, and then Amy, if you want to.
okay.
Please.
She doesn't. Rand doesn't make any. Doesn't beat around about this. She just says no. Photography is not an art. It's not creative because it's not selective. You can't. It's
She doesn't say it's not creative, by the way.
well, no. She says it's not. No, she literally says it is not a creative skill. It is literally, it says right
She
there. The
says that?
answer is no.
What page is
Yes,
this?
she's.
She says it's technical, not creative.
She says, well, I don't.
Oh,
I
okay.
have this in the
What page is
ebook,
this?
so I don't know the page number.
Trying to find the
But
page.
so
I
there's a
forgot she
paragraph.
said that.
Yeah. So it starts, well, first off, she talks about classism to romanticism. I don't know if that'll help you find it. But then says, a certain type of confusion about the relationship between scientific discoveries and art leads to the frequently asked question, is photography an art? The answer is no. It is a technical, not a creative skill. Art requires a selective recreation. A camera cannot perform the basic task of painting, a visual conceptualization, i.e., the creation of a concrete in terms of abstract essentials. And she again talks about the angles, lighting, lenses is selecting the means to reproduce. But she's very dismissive about it, that there's artistic, she starts backpedaling a bit, says there's artistic elements at how you select these things. But just because you're purposefully selecting things doesn't mean that you're abstracting away, as a painter does.
So Amy, what were you going to say? So that makes sense. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So the frequency and scope of epistemological complexity isn't there in photography. These are my words. This is my understanding of what she's trying to say.
Page
It's 'cause she
65, by the way. Sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, she talks earlier about the psychopistemology of selecting and recreating your metaphysical value judgments as an artist, and then she goes on to describe, the kinds of the depth and the scope and the frequency of how the kind of mental activity you have to go through to actually create something that is artistic, or she would consider to be artistic. And then, and she does talk about the content versus method, or the subject matter versus the method of it. So, the content in photography is basically what you see around you. And I'm not talking digital collages or anything like that. I'm just talking about point and shoot, or waiting for the sunrise at a certain time and having that kind of thing. Even the content is still what's out there, what the camera can grasp, without it. The camera isn't actually selecting anything. You're selecting in a limited fashion what you can see and what you think the camera is picking up. So there isn't a lot of psychopistemological interplay about what your metaphysical value judgments are when you're doing it. You might have a little bit of that, and you may also have a little bit of the method of composition, for instance. Like I said, figuring out the time of day and the kind of bright sunlight you want, things like that. But it's not the kind of complexity you're going to find if you're using a blank canvas, and you've got all these colors, and all of this method to discover, and being like a painter, and then also then having to figure out what am I going to select? That's
I think
very
if
involved.
yeah, I think her, if to bring it down to bring it to line up the abstracts with the concretes and vice versa. With a painting, you are literally starting with a blank canvas. You have to create ex nihilo your art. With a photograph, the argument is, you are limited to what's surrounding you or what's near you, where you're taking the picture. Yes, you can travel the world, travel the universe if you're doing astrophotography, to find your subject matter, but you're not creating. You're not creating out of nothing. You're always starting with something. You're always starting with existence in reality.
Yeah.
Metaphysical
Um,
existence, TNTS.
Got it. Yeah.
Whereas
No, I think
with yeah, you get it. You get it.
yeah,
You're
we
not
got that.
starting
So
a
yeah,
blank
so
canvas, blank page, blank
no,
set
we
of,
got that. Yeah. Amy,
silence in the terms of music.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
and then
sorry.
Michael, I
Yeah.
want you
No.
to. So we got to
Oh
move it
yeah. Real.
on. But
I need to just finish up what I was saying.
yeah,
So you've got this photography and you've got choices to make in photography. That is absolutely true. The amount of choices are don't even compare with the amount of choices that you have as a painter. So
so
but
amount.
saying that you can I don't disrespect photographers because they do know their craft, they know the time of day, they know the kind of techniques. There are a lot of things that are involved with photography, that
Oh,
a lot of
sure.
choices you have to make. So, and you can say you could, say this is my favorite photographer, in the whatever they can select in the limited amount of capacity that they can make choices. I
Well,
like what they
sure.
do. So, but in terms of the level of complexity Ayn Rand's talking about, it doesn't reach it. So
It's very
yeah.
interesting to me how passionate everybody gets. Michael, go ahead, and I want to chime in on something because it's really interesting.
Oh,
Like,
by
but
the way,
Mike, well, hold
I'm
on, but
I'm just trying to I was trying to present Rand.
no, I got it.
I'm not
It's interesting to me
I'm not
how
necessarily saying I
passionate people are.
agree.
I agree. I
Anyway,
understand.
go ahead.
But we all get so
It's good.
excited
It's
about it.
good.
Yeah. It's to me, this is really revealing in a good way. I'm with you. I'm not attacking anybody. Michael.
Yeah, I agree. The contrast is to painting versus photography. And her discussion of painting uh, is starting on, what is it?
Wait. Are you changing from the
Whatever.
photography question? Or are you
No. I'm
okay?
just,
Yeah, I want to stick on this for
but
another
the
couple
importance
minutes
of
because there's a lot of
within painting, she describes as a heightened reality that the artist brings, and that he brings this essentialized um, image together rather than something that contains accidental features that you might pick up in photography. Like I just think back to the analogy of the cold sore of uh, selecting
yeah, but you could
what
airbrush
gets
that out,
included or
right?
not.
And a photographer can airbrush that. So he's got the same level of selectivity he can do as a painter. So I think Ayn Rand's making a different point here. Robert, why don't is your hand up?
Yeah, I'll take the devil's advocate position.
Uh-oh.
Why not? Because my answer is going to be they're both right, and nobody likes an answer like that. Um,
Okay.
but to say that photography, because it doesn't start with a blank canvas or a blank script or an empty dance floor, doesn't have the same degree of art, of selectivity and recreation that the other arts do is to make a distinction of degree, but not of kind. So by that standard, photography is as much art as, for example, a silent movie, which does have action but doesn't have dialogue, so it's not quite literature. And it can't just be the recreation of reality that is the disqualifier, because Ayn Rand explicitly says architecture does not recreate reality. So that element's not in architecture, but she does regard that as art.
That's true.
So here's
But
something
art
that
does start. Art
Ayn
art
Rand,
does kind of architecture does kind of it starts with blank space. Yes, there's a setting, but with where the piece of architecture is just is just empty space. Okay, there's air there, molecules, but you have to bring everything into that space. I think is the distinction there.
so here's
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
Ayn Rand, this is page 65 in the photography
And
question.
I'm not sure
She
where I'm not
says,
sure where
hold on.
I'm not sure where I stand on this argument, by the
I
way.
gotcha. So I'm trying to bring out a broader thing that Ayn Rand is trying to do, in my view, that I think is important for us to try to grapple with. Because she's bringing this up for a purpose, right? And we'll talk about the music one broadly in a second to kind of get at her purpose. But she says on page 65, and this is with the photography thing. So she says the selection of camera angles, lighting, or lenses is merely a selection of the means to reproduce various aspects of the given, even existing concrete. So this is what you guys were saying, right? In terms of, so you have all these choices you can make, but the idea is that you're making these choices as a photographer to reproduce directly the image that the thing in existence that you're looking at. This is differentiated from a painting, which is all coming up in your head. The existence is processed through your mind in a sense, which to her is the differentiating point, right? So you have in a definition the genus and the differentia. The genus in her definition is the recreation of reality. There's all kinds of recreations of reality. The thing that makes this a different, the art different is according to an artist's metaphysical value judgments. To do that, you need to have it completely through your mind for her. Now, what's interesting to me, and you guys didn't actually bring this up as much as I thought you might, but whenever I've had this argument, so many people talk about the photographer's ability as a counterexample to her photography thing, as a photographer's ability to recreate reality, essentially, according to his metaphysical value judgments, in the sense of editing, brushing out stuff, changing things, moving it around, manipulating the image in so many ways, especially in our modern era, where you could take an image and using AI, you could turn it into something completely different, right? And so there is a weird sense, which to me reveals two things. It reveals Ayn Rand's point, in a sense, that she's trying to make with this example. And, that people, I guess that's the main point it reveals. I think it reveals that point. And then my question for you guys is the broader question of what is she trying to do with this whole essay, Art and Cognition? Whether you agree or disagree with a particular example, because there's an example I'm going to bring up that I actually disagree with her on in terms of the specifics. But she's trying, well, let me just approach that for you before I give you my answers. There's something she's trying to do with this whole thing. So for instance, the whole hypothesis of music. Remember, she emphasizes that it's a hypothesis. I think she says that 5 times. This is a hypothesis. And this is what it would take to prove it. So this whole essay is called Art and Cognition. What is she trying to do with the photography, with the different elements? She's trying to show something, to help you see something important, I think. Any thoughts?
Well, she's trying to do 2 things, I think, is give you a vocabulary, or at least a limited vocabulary, in all of these different art forms, and how to judge them. Because she talks about judging them, within their own context of, like, is Tolstoy a good writer? Well, he bores me to death, but he's a great writer.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of objective criteria of how to judge an art form or a piece of art. And then second is how does a human being process psychoepistemologically when they're actually confronted with art, when they're experiencing art, and why is that important to them? Which I will say real quick is, when I see a piece of art that I really love, what it's saying to me is, Amy, this is your universe. This is where you should be. This is where you feel at home. This is
Sure.
what's important to you, Amy. So there you go.
So page 69, Ayn Rand says, works of art, like everything else in the universe, are entities of a specific nature. The concept requires a definition by their essential characteristics, which distinguish them from all other existing entities. The genus of artwork is man-made objects, which represent a selective recreation of reality, according to the artist's metaphysical value judgment, by means of a specific material medium. The species are the works of the various branches of art defined by the particular media which they employ and which indicate their relation to the various elements of man's cognitive faculty. So that's page 69. It's toward the end of like just a couple paragraphs from the end. So I actually wanted to frame our discussion, which we've already gotten into in a good way, I think, with what Ayn Rand is trying to do is show you what an investigation into the arts should look like. She's not actually doing it in a sense. Like, I think she's just saying, this is, look, I'm a philosopher. Like, this is where I think you should start. This is the beginning. And I'm going to give you some hypothesis. And by that, I mean, normally when we talk about art, it's only in this feelings realm. It's only, oh, I like it, I didn't like it, it did something for me, it didn't do anything for me. And that's it. Now that's, again, she talks about this in Art and Sense of Life, Philosophy and Sense of Life. That's very important. It's why it's so personal. But here she's trying to say something specific about, one, we don't have the vocabulary to really have these conversations sometimes on a deeper level. And this illustrates how primitive we are. Like we have in physics and in so many other areas of mathematics, we have such deep, knowledge in engineering that we can have a conversation about how to build a rocket, right? We can't have that conversation about, the basis of art because we don't even approach it in this way at all. No one even tries this to approach it on a deep epistemological level. So the reason I bring this up is because I think whenever I've had these conversations with objectivists, they get so hung up on some of these hypotheses that they miss this broader point. That this is the point of this thing is like, she's saying, she's starting it off with like a frequent question, which the aestheticians have failed to answer is, what kinds of objects may be properly classified as art? And then people get all upset about the photography thing. And, but it's like, well, what about decorative arts? Are they art? Like, so all she's trying to do is say like, yeah, photography, what I've seen in 1970 is that photography is closer to decorative arts than it is to, fine art than it is to painting. And this is my reasoning why. Does that mean she's right? No. And again, she says hypothesis millions of times throughout the story, mostly about music, but I think that's throughout the essay. But I just wanted to frame it that way so we can have the rest of our conversation about the specific hypotheses and different things. But I think it's important to keep that in mind. Any thoughts on that before we go into these different senses? Yeah, Michael. Oh, okay.
Go ahead. No.
Michael, then Amy.
I think related to this point of talking about how there won't be new forms of art, fundamentally, in the sense that the primary arts are connected to man's senses and man's interaction with existence. There might be new technologies or so forth that create subgenres and new medium, but I think she's trying to get down to fundamentals of what are the arts related to your senses uh, and basing your judgment on that. But
Well,
like
and
setting out some criteria is what I'm saying.
yes, and to show you what it looks like to apply the scientific method to a realm like the arts, which never happens, or not in this way, right? So I think she's trying to show you just what that looks like on the scientific level. But Amy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, absolutely what you just said,
sorry.
that there is no realm of human concept or parts of reality that cannot be at least somewhat tackled by reason, by conceptualization and integration. And for those who say who are in the field of art who say it's all just subjective and loosey-goosey, feely-weely, and you really can't describe it, and you also can't validate it. So don't tell me that my banana stuck to a wall is not art. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean she's encouraging people to think and to use the scientific method and to keep their mind active with regard to this realm of human existence. It's because
Absolutely.
it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. And this goes to an earlier essay she talked about how primitive we are in this realm. Okay, so let's get into the different art forms she spends a lot of time talking about, right? So she says at the beginning, literature recreates reality by means of language, painting by means of color on a two-dimensional surface, sculpture by means of a three-dimensional form made of a solid material. Music employs the sounds produced by the periodic vibrations of a sonorous body and evokes man's sense of life, emotions, and then architecture is a class in and of itself. And then she goes into other things we'll get to if we have time. So the first one she actually gets into discussion is it's painting, right? Yeah. So she talks about Vermeer. So let's talk about painting. So you guys, this is page 37 if you're in here. I think where she starts with the painting stuff. What do you think her major point about painting is? Like other than it's about sight. So she's trying to get a little she's trying to explain some things about the visual arts broadly. Page 37. I'm going to keep reading if you guys don't tell me so. I'm threatening you with reading. The visual arts do not deal with the sensory field of awareness as such, but with the sensory field as perceived by a conceptual consciousness. What does that mean? The visual arts do not deal with the sensory field of awareness as such. I'm looking at a cup. That's my sensory field. It's reflecting, white and black.
She's saying that you have to that there's a process of perception involved. It has to go through that faculty. It's not just a matter of sensation.
So she gives the example of a painting of apples, and she's like, there are countless many apples that you could bring into your sensory awareness, but you have a mental image of an apple with its essential attributes, and all the accidental attributes are abstracted away, like whether there's a pit in the apple or something like that. And so I think that's related to the uh, as perceived by a conceptual consciousness. This is the stylization that she's refers to.
Yeah, so the apples you see in a still life are more real than real apples. Or they can look more real than it is in reality, is what she said.
Mhm.
And that's because of what you just said, I think, about the abstracting away and trying to emphasize a particular aspect of the apples. Their luster, sumptuousness, whatever it is that they're trying to emphasize, how tasty they could look, right? Oh, that's creepy. Robert, what you doing, Wes? Uh, just kidding. Okay, so all right,
Ooh.
the painting concretizes that image by means of visual essentials. So we're seeing the painting as through the mind of the artist and what he or she is trying very hard to concretize. So she gives the example of Vermeer. And Vermeer's subjects, she points out, are, usually mundane. It's like a housemaid or a milkmaid or whatever pouring some milk or something. It's something very everyday. But she's saying that what he's trying to emphasize is something else, something, more profound. And I'm curious, you know, what that is and if you guys agree with her on that.
Yeah, I'm just stepping away to get some coffee right now, but
Sure.
I can talk about Vermeer. I
Oh,
think
please.
it should be, like you said, that the content is certainly, a little bit more mundane. And but she talked about the method, this like, psychoepistemological method that Vermeer would have had to really focus on to get that stippling of light. So if you
Mm.
look at a Vermeer painting, you're going to see these little stipples of white paint that are, unless you look real close, they're undetectable. So it's not talking about pointillism or anything like that. It's just he has such detail in the quality and the method of his painting, the technique of his painting, that he's able to recreate what his eye, or many people's, what the eye is actually grasping and perceptually, uh, in terms of how light is reflecting on different objects.
Mm.
Um, so you get a real, you can, for me anyway, for Vermeer, I get a heightened sense of reality, of a heightened sense of reflection of light, a heightened sense of consistency of texture. Oh God, Vermeer's so good at that. Um, but yeah, I think that's the only thing I can really add to it. Yeah, you see the milkmaid. Um, I see a lot of
This is not a great
uh
reproduction, but yeah.
no, but you see the consistency where the bread is not going to be the same texture as her apron. Where the milk that's pouring out from the jug is not the same texture as the wall.
Mhm.
Um, the kinds of things that he does in his technique to make it look lifelike or more real than life, is
Yeah.
really admirable. And it's such a, it's like, I mean, if I had to compare it to music, if you can find even just a simple example in music, you've got like a melody and harmony going on at the same time. Sometimes a combination of that melody and harmony is going to give you a feeling of flying, um at least for
Mm.
me. um
Mm.
but yeah, looking into Vermeer's
Mm.
world of what he selected, and how he selected, how he created it, is a really lovely, it's a lovely exercise.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think again, so Ayn Rand's trying to emphasize something that's really unique about art. Like, and I think one way to think about it is fine art, even just the scaling of the tuning up to more and more emphasis on what the artist is trying, or more and more focus on what the artist is trying to emphasize. And the more there is something for the artist to emphasize, or that the artist is emphasizing, I think the more it is art in Ayn Rand's view. That's the selective part. That Vermeer is not trying to show you a picture of a milkmaid. He's using that as the subject to bring out something about light, as Amy was saying. And like I sometimes think of it as like a knob that you turn more and more. The more it's turned, the more it's focused and selected on something, and that's the finer and finer art. Versus if it's broader and broader and broader, it still can have art elements, but it's less and less like an art form. That's how I think of it. I don't know if that's how Ayn Rand thinks about it. That's how I think of it. Um, so what did you guys think about her discussion about the fact that, or her idea that or sculpture is dead? Basically, it's almost a dead art. Its great day was in ancient Greece, which philosophically was a man-centered civilization. Do you remember her argument about this? So
What
she
page is
says
that?
this is page 40 in this version.
Yeah.
She basically says that sculpture is more limited in what it can do, um, than than painting. Painting, and so actually that's a good point about what we could discuss. Like, why is sculpture more limited than painting in her view?
Oh, she says it has to deal with the human figure specifically, um,
Versus,
versus landscapes and painting or something else like that.
Versus
Still
something
lifes.
piled together.
well, yes, Margaret, but I mean between painting and sculpture. Why is
Oh, I
sculpture
see.
as a feel as an activity, as an art form, more limited in her view than painting? Do you think? That's what she says. She says, um, at the top, compared to painting, sculpture is more limited, a form of art. So why is
Yeah,
it a more limited?
it's also
Oh,
limited and like it's a one color thing.
it's-
It's whatever the color of the material is. You can't use color to express anything. You have to
yeah.
just go with the marble, the white marble. That's it.
Although we do think,
And it's also
yeah,
limited. She says it's limited to a three-dimensional shape. Yeah, but it's limited. Yeah, without color, like you said. Um, but it's also because it's concrete bound with its emphasis on touch and concrete and concrete entities. I mean, sometimes concrete slash stone. I mean that there's a funny thing there.
I,
So it's not reproducing like a painting on a two-dimensional surface, and therefore able to.
I found this interesting. I don't know if you guys knew this,
Sorry.
but no, that's all right. Like, I just wanted to point out that the scholarship is now that the Greeks painted their sculptures.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know
Hmm.
what that is. So that I think that's an interesting discussion about what Ayn Rand was
Yeah,
talking
we
about.
we only, yeah, she didn't realize at the time.
Yeah, I
This
don't
is
think she
again
knew
knowledge.
this.
Knowledge is contextual.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
that and so is certainty. Um, she might have had to revise this if she knew that.
Yeah, I think she might. I don't know. Do you think
Interesting.
she would have revised? That's a good question.
We only have this tradition of we only had this historical tradition of non of a culture of colorless sculpture because the colors came off.
Yeah. Robert, what you got?
That's
But that's a
interesting.
good point, Mark. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's limited in a more obvious way than that.
Okay.
A sculpture is a sculpture of the subject, whereas a painting has a setting, it has a context, it has a
Mm,
background. If you see a sculpture of a man and compare that to a painting of a man, in the
mm,
painting you see where the man is, you see, what the background is, what kind of world he's in, and how that's presented by the artist. The sculpture is limited to
Well,
the sub. You could presumably do a sculpture and also sculpt a tree next to the
right,
guy, but no, that's
but I
entirely
wonder what
different.
she would have thought of like so-called art installations, which really hadn't started, which where there is a setting involved as
oh,
well
there's
as
been art installations for a long time, but yeah,
oh, okay, fine,
I, I,
but
s- I-
she didn't
but I
address
think
that in this
Robert's
essay
point is
though.
she didn't address it, but I think Robert's point, I agree with that, because there is still limitations, but I still think there's painting just has so much that you can do with it that doesn't have the limitations in terms of what you're trying to convey in the form that it is. So you can paint in space, you could paint, you could like Robert said, you could paint a whole setting with sculpture. There's some ability to do that, but it's much more limited in its ability to do that. And it's just a
Right.
more challenging thing to do. But
You're
Michael,
also limited in sculpture by not the surroundings that you can't control, such as the lighting around the sculpture. Whereas
sure,
in the painting, you are not only doing your settings and your subject or whatever, but you're also the lighting. You're also the lighting director. You're also special. To borrow movie making or cinematography. You're the cinematographer. You're the special effects. You're the
sure,
you're choosing you can simulate a different form of visual sensation as well, whereas with sculpture
sure.
you're always going
Is that
to
Robert or
be.
Amy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
No,
that's Robert
oh, no, it's
saying
Robert.
that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's worth mentioning that limitations are not weaknesses. Yes. Yeah, I agree.
No, I didn't say weak. No,
No,
no, no,
no, he's
not
not talking. I don't
weaknesses.
think he's referring to you. I don't think. But yeah,
No, not
a limitation.
yeah,
He's just
not
saying generally
weaknesses.
limitations are not weaknesses, but they can be perceived that way sometimes. I think is what he's
It,
indicating. But I
Well,
agree.
Yeah,
and I have to mention that not in regard to what Mark's saying, but as a background for the whole conversation, when we get into the question of why is architecture art and photography is not, to say something that is not an art is not to say that it's lesser than. And that's
Okay.
half of the people who object to that characterization of photography is not art. Or what are you saying? It's not as good as art? No.
Yeah.
So nobody's saying that sculpture is not at the level of painting. The fact that it's more limited, sure, it is more limited in terms of what you can do and what the elements are, and usually how much color is in it and whether there's a background. It's not lesser than in that way. So I don't feel any need to defend the sculpture just because we're making that point. And again, not just in regard to sculpture. This will affect several parts of this conversation that cause some of the
Yeah.
conflicts
Like
that Kurt's
decorative arts
suggesting.
and things like that. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Interior design is a magnificent thing, and people get paid tons of money for it, and they should. And then to say, well, but that's not art. Then, oh, how can
Yeah.
you say that? Well, because it doesn't do what art does.
And Tom, I want to get to you because I want to ask you about design actually, since you're a digital designer. But Michael, we have Michael and Amy questions or discussions.
I agree with Robert's point. That's really helpful to me of the point of setting that you get in a painting that you don't necessarily have in architecture. And she talks about one of the most effective functions of sculpture is to serve as architectural ornament. And I didn't quite agree with that. Like I think you can bring a sculpture into different spaces. Like you don't design a house to have a sculpture with it. Like you can bring sculpture to various places, and but I think it helps improve the it can help improve the beauty of the space, but that's again more utilitarian and doesn't. I just think of in that sense, like in the fountainhead of the Stoddard Temple, and you have the sculpture of Dominique, and it adds to the temple, but
But that's
it's
her
also
point.
can stand alone on its own, like with Winan buys it and
Oh,
so forth. But,
yeah, yeah. And that's how most art, most sculptures are, is that, like the sculptures we have in museums were part of buildings, right? They weren't, I think that's her broader point, but I don't know if it's an important point or not, but yeah, but Amy, go ahead.
So, sculpture, I really, really, really wish someday that maybe there could be a museum where you could go and there would be even like reproductions of beautiful sculptures, and you can go in, you can touch them.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Touching
mean,
the
it's
arts.
yeah. I mean, literally, you can't. I mean, they won't allow you to even if you go into say like architecture. If you go to a Frank Lloyd Wright home, the tour guy is not. They're gonna scold you if you start touching things. But yeah, for unless you own a sculpture and have it in
Yeah.
your home, you don't get to actually put your hand on it, feel what the sculptor actually achieved
Yeah.
in a tactile sense.
Linda
Gosh, I
Cordair,
wish we could do that.
Linda Cordair does tours at her place if you've ever gone, where it's with like a light glove, but she helps you see
Really?
that part of it. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
that's let
and she'll like let you touch and you'll talk about the texture as well as the broader point. And now, of course, you're not just grabbing it and running on it because these are expensive as hell, obviously. That's obviously the challenge,
Yeah.
is how expensive these things are. And like having someone break them is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, so that's painting, sculpture's limited. Then she goes into music. Okay, so let's get into this. Um, hopefully this won't go too off the rails, but let's see, because this is the hypothesis. This is such an interesting hypothesis when I first listened to it or read it, and it's definitely something I've thought about a lot. And I'll just say, we could start this way. At the top of page 41, she talks about the pattern of how art usually affects you and how it's processed psychoepistemologically. So the pattern this is the general pattern of art, I think, from perception to conceptual understanding to appraisal to emotion. So I think about that all the time when we're doing Don Quixote right now in my other group, right? So we're perceiving it in the sense of Cervantes is giving us sentences that are building up to paragraphs that are painting a picture, characterization, all these things. So we have to conceptualize it as we're reading. And then we have to kind of appraise it. We have to intellectually think about it on some level. Who is this person? Who are these characters together? What's happening in the drama? And then we have the emotion when we understand it on some level. That's true of painting, even. Like some paintings might strike you immediately to some degree, but usually, especially the more powerful, in my experience, you're thinking about why is it this way? And you're kind of appraising it, and then you have the music is like, to hell with all that. I'm going to just reach into your heart and just rip it out, right? Like it's crazy. And when you think about it in this context, and she says the pattern of the process involved in music is from perception to emotion to appraisal to conceptual understanding. So it's almost completely reversed, except for the perception part. That's always the basis. Okay, so do you agree? What are some examples? What do you think about this? And then I want to ask you, about her hypothesis about this. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, who doesn't agree?
True.
Well, I agree up to that point. When we get a little bit further along, I'll have something to say
Well,
about.
tell me. All right, tell me where you got we could start with your disagreement then.
Well, the only element I found missing in Ayn Rand's hypothesis regarding music is she focuses on integration. And the greater the need for integration and the better the music, the more it can be integrated. The greater pleasure that a higher kind of mind, a mind that seeks that kind of integration, will find in the music, and a certain sort of disconnected or disoriented, or what's the word I'm looking for? A certain kind of mind will appreciate music that is a jumble because it sees the world as a jumble, and that's an affirmation of their worldview. And she really focused on the highest kinds of music. The best music is music in which, an integrating mind can appreciate the integration of the music. And what she left out, which was interesting to me, and I'm not saying she did anything wrong, but it's a missing piece, is that music is made up of tones that themselves are pleasurable. Simple themes don't have to sound like nursery rhymes. They can just be pleasurable ends, and just like certain kinds of art, the color itself, the texture can be part of the joy in the art.
Sure.
Simply the color. Color is a pleasure to see. Tones, beautiful tones produced by well-crafted instruments, even if very simple, can be enormously powerful. And that's
like
something that's not really part of her analysis. And she really doesn't get much into that with the other forms of art either. The simple joy of the elements themselves and the way that affirms life life is wonderful when it's complicated and difficult and we have great triumphs. Life is also great when it is simple and joyous, and maybe one of the elements where she had a project here and she was focusing on the higher kinds of art because she wants to validate that. But listen to the tiddlywink music that's been documented that she used to enjoy, and some of that was just the pop music of the day, and she loved it, and she should have loved it.
Yeah, so I mean, this is an interesting thing to think about. Is you're right. I think she might have mentioned this or alluded to it very briefly, but yeah, she doesn't emphasize the beauty of individual parts of the things that make up art. But I think that's on purpose, obviously. She's trying to say something about the role of art in particular, not about beauty broadly. This is not a book about beauty as such, as a high concept. Like if she wrote a book on justice as such. This is a book about art in particular, which is a particular way of combining these elements into something.
And that's what I mean when I say that. Well,
that's not part of her analysis. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
But I think it does tend to color her analysis. It does affect her project. I think she ends up leaving some things out that would have been worth including and would have made things clear. But again, that'll get back to the question of why photography can be understood as art, even if it's not art, or not art by Ayn Rand's definition. Does photography do what art does? Does it have elements of selectivity, et cetera, et cetera? I think in the case of music, it would have been, and maybe it didn't fit. But in the case of all of the forms of art, I think again, the pleasure of just the elements themselves. Think of, if you're a musician, think of a real quality instrument, or if you're a painter, think of working with really quality materials versus working with cheap stuff.
Sure.
So
yeah, no, thank you.
That was what I got.
No, that's interesting.
And
there's more
and again,
about what
this is
you
going to
talked
touch.
about. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It just touches on some of the controversies you talked about. We would get together in groups and we would argue over whether photography was art. Well, we would get together in groups probably about the same time you're talking about and argue over whether rock and roll is a valid form of music.
Well, so that's what I thought you were going with. And I do want to bring that up because she does actually kind of touch on that without saying it exactly. The beauty thing, I think, is a totally different subject in a sense, but the rock and roll thing is interesting, and the tiddlywink music and all that. But before we do that, Michael, what do you got?
This is maybe another not quite agree, or I don't see it for myself personally immediately, is just on it takes me a while to appreciate a piece of music, and I don't necessarily have the immediate response. She talks about that music brings up emotions, and that you feel this way, this piece makes me feel this, and it kind of like this stream of images that come to mind, and then you form this emotional abstraction, and that's similar to sense of life, and that's an interesting connection. My experience, it usually takes, like for a new symphony, it takes 4 or 5 listens to pull out the main melodies and to enjoy them. And
Well, she kind of talks about that too, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I agree with that, Michael. And this is something, and this is what also, Robert, what you were saying to try to connect these. This is what I thought you guys were, or you were kind of getting to, is this idea of like the higher purposeful man is going to have a desire for this more complex type of music versus not, less complex. And she doesn't put it exactly like that, but that's how I kind of took it.
Yeah, maybe that's how.
Yeah, and
that's where it shows up, that it's the complexity of the music that it takes more listens to integrate and to get to. But
and there is a kind of and she talks even about, in a different context, she talks even about training your taste, which is something I actually agree with. But she puts it in an interesting context about something else, where she's talking about when the modern artists, and by modern or contemporary music, she's talking about like the screeches, burps, traffic sign stuff, where it's just like all kinds of random sounds put together, atonalism, stuff like that. And what they will often say is that we are trying to train the people to have different approaches to music and different abilities to listen to music. And Ayn Rand says, I have to find the exact spot. She says like, that is, you can train the mind, but not in that, like, not to destroy itself or something like that. Right. Like, so anyway, but Amy, go ahead.
So this is kind of touching on what Robert talked about with her tiddlywink music. That music was turn of the century kind of pop music. And my hypothesis, this is not my hypothesis. People have come up with them for this as well. But the formidable years of your adolescence and teenage years, the music that you take in that time period it may actually, more likely than not that I've seen, is going to be some of your very favorite music. And my hypothesis is that as you are understanding your role in the universe and who you are and what you like and what you love, and also testing out the epistemological processes, hopefully the good ones that you've learned in childhood. Um, and all of this adds up to the kind of music you will like in that time period of your life. Um, so, when we talk about, oh, is rock and roll, is that valid as music? A lot of times that's going to be valid in that context of growing up and finding yourself in a epistemological situation where you are expanding your concepts really at a rapid pace. And you're finding music that you can feel at home with at that time period. So that's why it's hard to talk about music, is because a lot of times, even Yaron Brook will talk about like how he likes Pink Floyd because that's how he grew up with. Well, but I don't particularly like that band. But yeah, I mean, and of course there is, you can be open to, different other types of music in other periods of your life. But that time of your adolescence and teenage years, the music that you like is usually always going to stick with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think another way to even formulate what you just said is you're in your youth, you're formulating your sense of life. It's being formulated. And so the art forms in general that have an impact on that for whatever reason are going to stick with you to the end of your life in a sense. And so, yes, I think, like me, my parents listened to only golden oldies when I was growing up. So I like the crooners and the Dean Martins and all those people that when I was formulating, when I was 10, 12, 11, 12, 14, 15, and, falling in love and, things like that, you're getting, and then the music that I listened to at that time was these kinds of romantics and that merged into my sense of life. And I think that's relevant to my enjoyment of those types of artwork. But go ahead, Michael.
Similar experience, and like we were talking before this call of grown in appreciation just from classical music to opera. But
Mm.
I mean, my first introduction to classical music was, I don't know, when I was 8 or so, in Beethoven's Ninth, and that symphony has stuck with me ever since. I mean, it's just, I listen maybe once or twice a week to it. I mean, it's um, so personal to me. But
Yeah.
so I started listening to a lot of classical music, but uh, then grew towards opera. And as I was saying that, um, with opera, I had to watch the performances first to appreciate them, recordings or live. That I couldn't just listen to opera music on its own. I had to understand the dramatic context and read the libretto and watch, a clip or something that, on its own, it's difficult to approach. And uh, but to put it more broadly, I was just uh, interested why, like, or the evolution of music from lyrical music to just symphony or instrumental music, wasn't that distinction wasn't discussed too much. Like, was music first
It's an
from
interesting one.
voice, and or from instruments, and does it matter, or like is instrumental music more abstract, or
Oh,
is
well,
lyrical music
that
like
that is
opera more abstract? Like,
that's a question Ayn Rand again. So she is saying this is a hypothesis, and then she indicates all the things necessary, her hypothesis about music and how it works with tones. And she quotes that guy that I don't remember the book on tonalism and how it
Waltz.
affects your mind. And there's yeah, exactly. And but she says like there's so much work that needs to be done that this is like your deuce is wild. There's just nothing like you cannot
Yeah.
claim anything about music at this point. There's just not enough vocabulary to have the conversation. So now she does say, Michael, in here, which I think is true about all art, is that the development coincides with deep philosophical ideas throughout history. And again, because this is fresh on my mind, but we're doing Don Quixote and we're talking about perspectivism and how the different perspectives getting at truth is a new kind of Renaissance idea, basically. And you see this in paintings and in other, with the vanishing point starting, where it's like people's perspective is really, the human perspective is very important. And you see this in various art forms, and this is a big Renaissance idea at this time. And I'm sure there's a corresponding progression in Renaissance music that you could do. But Tom, I wanted to bring you in because I said we were going to talk about this earlier, so I want to make sure we talk about this because you are, we talk about like different art forms, decorative art, things like versus or decorations versus things like fine art and a painting or something. So your role and your job is basically designing things in a sense, right? Broadest sense.
Graphic design, right?
Yeah. So
what is a graphic?
So do you is graphic design art? And how do you think of that?
Yeah, I guess I haven't thought of it as art. I thought of it as a very constrained, I put it in the field of communication. It's visual communication. You think about that, and it has to me, that's a very practical use. It's very practical. So it's usually connected to business and commerce. So, and it doesn't mean that, again, like Robert's saying, it doesn't mean that it's like, oh, it's less than, or, there's something not special. She even says that. So graphic art can be really beautiful or whatever.
Absolutely.
But when I think, because I thought a lot about this, about what is it that I even do for a living sometimes. So you said the difference, because ARI is not, I do work for ARI, and ARI is full of intellectuals, and intellectuals sometimes have trouble with the visual. They don't see any importance in it. They're all about the ideas and the words.
Yeah.
But if you take a Google Doc, why do we even bother? Why don't we just put Google Docs out? Why don't we just release Google Docs? Why do we even bother to, bring an aesthetic to Ocon? Why does it matter? So I always see this like, it's kind of it's a three-dimensionality to something. It's an enhancement. And, my job is to understand, what is being communicated with this graphic? What is the client trying to say? And then, making the important thing, I'm being selective in sense of like, I'm using the typography and the color to draw emphasis to some things, less emphasis to others. And so, but it's a way to make it more immediately graspable. So it brings in more senses. I think that's really what it is. Like, you could read a document. If you had the Ocon page just as a document of words, what would that do to you, right? You would look at that and go like, But if you go to the page and it's like, it has a kind of American theme, and it has kind of a retro font or whatever, you start to have a sense of what that conference is trying to be about. So, but it's not the same as art. It's
almost like they learned from artists and applied that in a commercial sense, right? Like I think of the Apple logo and what does it convey? That's a work of art in a certain sense. Now, is it fine art that's emphasizing something very conceptual for you to focus on exclusively? No, it has a commercial, a kind of business sense to it. It represents a business that makes products, right? But the Apple logo it conveys a lot by using many of the techniques that you learn from art to this commercial setting. And it conveys creativity, it conveys knowledge, right? It conveys you taking a bite out of knowledge and all those types of things. Yeah, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's hard to confuse it. You, we could. This is a whole other rabbit hole of not of the act the percepts with the branding that is attached to it. So I'm not going to get into marketing here.
Yeah, no, that's not the point I think Tom or I are trying to make. We're just making the point of what makes graphic design different than art. And part of it is, I think, the fundamental purpose of what you're trying to do. So when Tom is trying to create something for Ocon, there's certain values that he's trying to convey. The values are for a productive business end. They're not for a purely conceptual contemplative end in and of itself. That's not to say you can't contemplate and enjoy them, but they're trying to be part of an overall feeling that the conference, which is trying to charge money and teach you something, is trying to have. Just like the Apple logo is trying to convey something about the kind of person that buys a Mac, to kind of be a branding. Like branding is a good word, right? Think about branding a cow. Like you're trying to brand on someone's head.
Yeah, that's
And I think that so they're using art in the sense of what, if you are an artist, this is what an artist does, these are the techniques they use. And you're applying your mind toward a commercial end, advertising, things like that. Okay, so
Yeah, maybe just
okay.
the point there is just that, and maybe the artist is truly like it's it's a 100% choice for them. Like I make choices within a highly constrained, realm here. Like I don't see
Well,
it
that's a
as
good point. Yeah, so you're not when
right.
you're
I mean, I'm
selecting.
gonna like the
Yeah,
artist is like I want to communicate something from my
yeah,
soul. These are my
yeah.
metaphysics. I'm not doing that. I'm saying I have a practical purpose here to
That's a
help
good point.
sell this product or this event or
Yes.
whatever.
Yep, yep.
So, and that's
So
why I think why I've liked it because I've always been, a capitalist for a long time. So
yeah,
to me, it was like that practicality of it's a way to be creative in a business context
yeah.
rather than just rely on
And that's
being a
very
good
important.
artist.
Yeah. But I think
Yeah.
but
so I think that brings
rolling
out a good
rolling
point.
this. But here, rolling this back. Let's roll this back though, because time. Uh, we're you were asking. There's this controversy. When people when you bring up the photography is not art statement from this essay from Ayn Rand, the photographers and appreciators that are like, oh, is photography not as good as art? Well, I think the problem is folks are conflating the act of art with the act of creativity, and
Mhm.
Rand
Yeah.
says right here that creativity and artistic creation are not the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Now, for the ending, I thought, Amy and Robert could talk about, and we could have a discussion about performance art and dance in particular. So now
Yes,
I have
please.
things to say about that too. I've started acting a little bit. So it's interesting as a medium, but I thought you guys could lead us in this. What are your thoughts about Ayn Rand's view of
I'm
performance?
extraordinarily interested in this because I've been dancing for 2 years as well.
Cool. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a terrible dancer, but I like to watch it.
Well,
I
I'll
have
So
I
and
start.
have
that's
I have
different than doing
I have
yourself in
I
front
have
of it.
I came to the instructor and I said I have ambitions of adequacy. So
But
yeah.
Yeah.
but that's different than what Ayn Rand's talking about here, though, right? Because
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
not talking
yeah.
about you doing it like dance as therapy or exercise or enjoyment. She's talking
No, no,
about
no. But
the appreciating of watching it and what
right,
it
but I
does to
also
you.
do but I've also done choreographed performances too.
Oh, okay, okay, cool. I didn't know that. That's interesting. But yeah, Amy, Robert, what do you got?
Well, I can start off, and I just want to say also, Tom, I'm go graphic designing because I've been a graphic designer and I kind of still am. I'm in email marketing right now, so you
That's
got to
cool.
engage, you got to be relevant, you got to
Yeah.
provide incentives, you got to make them see themselves where you are. All right, so um, uh, dancing is something I've done since I could walk. Um, so basically I think Ayn Rand was talking about, you need to have some kind of music with dance, some kind of rhythm that the dancer is following in some sense. Um, and for me, I've been able to hear a piece of music and I can immediately interpret how to dance. That's how much of a dancer I am, and I love it like deeply. And I've done tap, I've done everything except for ballet. I'll just say that. Um, I've done partner dance. I've right now I'm doing flamenco dance as a Spanish dance, with the castanets and the shells and the fans. And uh and so as the art form of dance, this is my understanding. You are interpreting a beautiful piece of music. It can't be some clunky, horrible John Cage thing. Um,
I don't know who that is.
it's got to be beautiful. It's got to be rhythm, have melody and harmony in it. Um, and usually with a consistent beat, it's really difficult to dance to a symphony. You can, but it's not easy. It has to have a fairly consistent beat. Um,
Interesting.
and you're basically using your limbs. You've got your head, you've got the facial expression, you've got your arms, you've got your hands, you've got the position of your shoulders, you've got your core muscles, and you've got your legs, of course, your feet in tap dancing. But all of these pieces of you um, are going to interpret and add to the experience of that piece of music that you're listening to. And so my arms are basically instruments of interpreting the music and emphasizing certain points of the music. And uh, and it's a sense that I don't think I don't know if Ayn Rand, maybe she did, talked about it in this way. I wouldn't call it tactile necessarily. I would call it kinetic of
She does say
pertaining to
kinetic.
movement.
She
Yeah,
talks
does
about
she?
this.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
good. Thank
That
you.
every
Yeah.
kinetic, like every emotion you have has a kinetic counterpart.
Yes.
Right. So like joy
Yeah,
or something like it. But go ahead. Sorry.
let me just read from page 67 there. The dance is the silent partner of music and participates in a division of labor. Music presents a stylized version of man's consciousness in action.
Yes.
Dance presents a stylized version of man's body in action.
Yeah.
And I agree with everything Ayn Rand says in that. There's like 10 or 15 paragraphs here on dance, but
Yeah.
it's interesting that she's able to include it in an analysis of art. And she makes the point that dance requires music, which is interesting because you can dance without music, but then
Well, to be
you
what
create
though?
the music in your dance.
But I think that's a really important point. So she if you're doing it without music, it doesn't mean it just like the decorative arts or the graphic design doesn't mean it's not useful or good in any way. And she gives an example. Do you remember the example she gives? Like if you're doing incredible movements without music, what is that called to
Right.
her? It's called gymnastics.
Yeah,
And you could
but
still appreciate the
right.
movement of the body, but it's not an art in the way she's trying to convey.
Right. I mean, and the point I was going to make was that there's an exception to that, and that's when dance creates music. Her favorite form of dancing is tap dancing, and tap dancing is often performed without any music, but yeah, the dancer is creating the music.
That's interesting. I don't know if I've
I
ever
want to
seen that.
mention,
But go ahead,
I
Amy.
need to mention though, flamenco.
Yeah.
So we not only do we have like metal on our shoes, so it's kind of a sort of a version of tap dancing, but we have castanets, which are the wooden pieces that go clicky clack and and give a rhythm to the performance as well. Um, and then we also have what we call palmas, which is basically hand clapping, which is part of. So if you just go to YouTube, look up a flamenco dance, and you'll see there's all sorts of ways. And
Yeah, like
I
tap, it can create its own music.
That's
yes,
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think she includes the performing arts in order to emphasize her broader point again about what differentiates art from other things and how should you approach this question. And I think, what you brought up with the tap dancing can be its own music is an interesting one. I don't know if I've really seen that. Like, I guess a little bit. Like on street corners, you might see just people just tap dancing and they're making like a beat with it or whatever. So that's interesting. Yeah.
I would recommend watching Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies.
Oh yes.
I have seen some of those for sure. Yeah, they're gorgeous. And it's not,
Yeah,
it wouldn't be the same if you had the music or the sound turned off, like if you muted it. It would still
that's
be,
true.
they'd be very, like, wow, how are they making this magic with their bodies, movement wise, but it would not have the same effect. It's because it's music.
Although that's a good point, because would it still be art,
I
or
think
would it
no,
look like gymnastics?
I think that's the
It-
point. Yes,
the things that you do when you're dancing to music are entirely different than what you would do when you're doing gymnastics. So that's an interesting question.
I see what you're saying.
But even in gymnastics, there's music
Yeah, they add music to
usually.
it. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
at least in terms. Well, okay. In gymnastics floor routines, there's music, but there's not when it's um I'm hardware involved. I know there's equipment involved. That's different.
yeah, like
Yeah,
that.
now we're gonna have
That
a whole
horse.
session on borderline cases.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the funny thing about art. There are there it's fuzzy, and that's why these are hypotheses.
Well, it's not like I said at the beginning. It's yeah, it's hypotheses, especially with music, but also this isn't, she quotes from one book, but she's only in the tonal book, the book on tonalism, but she's only indicating the beginning, like she's opening the door to how to approach this. She's not doing all the work necessary to understand art and cognition. I don't think. I think she's essentially saying these are the questions and the way to approach this. Good luck. Right? Like go forth and
Yeah,
figure it out. And do all the scientific, research and things necessary to make this happen.
Yeah, I go a
Um,
little further with that. I do think she's giving the answers. I just think the application of those answers shouldn't be done simplistically. She's giving answers to an entire world of content. So I don't think it takes anything away from the finality of her understanding to say, oh, but in these borderline cases, you're going to see mixed elements, and some things are art and some things are not. And that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah. That's how.
change, it doesn't like lower what she's saying to just a hypothesis. It's just that some things are complicated.
Yeah, no, but well, all right, this is a whole nother. So, um, I guess I don't, uh, I'm just saying that some of these things are less refined in their total
Yes,
aesthetic value. And she
sure.
hasn't refined them. She's just positing her views on them. I think when it comes to like painting and architecture, and then literature, which is going to be a lot on literature going forward. She has a lot to say about that because she's a literary writer. And so she knows a lot, she's done a lot of thinking on that one in a way that she can't with music, and she maybe hasn't as much in some of the other arts. But Michael, what you got?
Yeah, there's kind of two senses of cognition that I think we've been discussing. There's what you're saying of cognition of being able to analyze artwork and approach it scientifically and rationally. Um, but there's also cognition in the sense of aiding one's own understanding or in view of reality. She talks about this is right at the beginning, art and it teaches man how to use his consciousness.
Yeah.
It conditions or stylizes man's consciousness by conveying to him a certain way of looking at existence. And that stylized way of looking at existence is being able to see things essentially. And I
Mm.
think that's what she's trying to apply to these art forms that um, an artwork should be self-contained and integrate all its elements together to a an abstract meaning and just like on the point of literature, how that applies. Like there's no extraneous things in plot. Like all the plot action should build up and be related to each other, which is a point that Aristotle picks up or lays down, I should say, in the poetics that you know well integrated
Yeah.
plot structures. But
Well, this will be an interesting discussion for next time. But yeah, because that's an important one for us to talk about. And yeah,
but cognition just
but in terms of
focused on
cognition,
the
yeah.
essential versus the accidental is all
Yeah.
I'm saying. And
I agree with, yeah, 100%. And I think we get things like we don't get great art in our lives now. I mean, I think people here in this chat probably do, but in general, I think a lot of people don't get a lot of great exposure to art, and they don't even have the how can I say this nicely, the capacity or the desire to take the time to do it. But they are getting their mind trained in a certain sense, their consciousness trained in various ways from snippets here and there of things that have, artistic elements in them, or something that's giving shape to their mind. And it's something that I think Ayn Rand is trying to rail against, about the how to get great art in your life and why it's important, because it gives you a kind of control over this process of the training or molding of your mind, versus like
yeah,
just footprints all over the place from a million different places, and you can't put it together. But when you have an artwork, you can like see it, and then you recognize a mirror in yourself, and then you can evaluate it. You could her point is you can contemplate it outside of yourself.
I was interested in
Closing up
the Vermeer painting discussion of putting it in reverse to your life. That like once you've seen Vermeer's art, that you have this appreciation for light and for different scenes, and that you can appreciate sunlight through your window on a morning, for example. And I mean that's where Vermeer might have pulled the images from initially to create his essentialized view.
Good
but
point. Yeah.
in reverse, you can do the same. That I really appreciate this morning all the more because I know I've known how to pull out the pieces of light that art trained me on.
Yeah, and you see it differently. Just like if you walk in, this is the nature poets and the nature painters were trying to do this, where they were trying to help you see the beauty in nature. And so if you read a lot of nature poets, if you look at paintings, I think when you go out into nature, you start seeing things a little bit differently. You start appreciating it in a different way. Or buildings or bridges or whatever. You could do that with anything, in a sense. All right, so that's our time. Art and cognition. My whole goal was that we solve the photography question. I think we did. I think we solved it. It's done. So it's going to officially be solved. Ayn Rand.
I'm gonna refer people to this YouTube video anytime this comes up from now on.
Yeah,
that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
So what was the solution?
A recognition of what Ayn Rand was trying to do with the whole article, Art and Cognition, that I think a lot of people take it out of context. Like many things, when what she's trying to do is show you the path to how to approach, like scientifically, this question of art. And so this is one example. This is one of many examples she's using throughout this whole thing, including the hypothesis. So the hypothesis of music is just laying out the groundworks of how to approach this whole thing. I mean, that of art in this way. Her opening sentence is about what the aestheticians have failed to do, essentially, as this. And now this is one essay. This is not the answer, the final conclusion to all these things. It is saying that, and again, at the very end of this essay, she talks about her approach to defining. She even talks about we need definitions. So she talks about definitions at the end. Why do we need definitions? Because A is A, blah, blah, blah. And then she said something made by an artist is not a definition. A beard and a vacant stare are not the defining characteristics of an artist. I love that one. She has all these things. Why does she talk about this? Again, goes back to the photography question, because she's framing this whole thing, right? So beginning, aestheticians don't even ask the freaking question about what art is. Then she goes into all these things about like hypothesis and views of how she thinks what art is. And then she talks about the importance at the end of definitions and having firm scientific approach. So my point is that the photography question is framed in this context of how to approach, objectively analyzing it. I don't think it's the final answer. I think it's the beginnings, and she's giving you those things. But yeah, Amy. And by the way, if you need to go, thank you for sticking around. We are past time. I'll stick around for a few more minutes, but thank you.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to all of us for delving into this content in the first place, because
Yeah.
it's very difficult. It takes a lot of introspection to get anything out of it. And I'll just say this, that you can't really get too much out of this if you approach it with a religious or mysticist viewpoint or epistemology.
Yeah.
And
That's Ayn Rand's point too. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
And it is important. I think we've covered this, but when I was younger, and I've seen people do this too, they'll read this and say, "But I like rock and roll, or I like
Yeah.
photography. I must be immoral."
Yeah.
And that's not the point of it. And so thanks, Kirk, for driving that home. And it's been a great talk.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to learn more about this. I'm excited to go into principles of literature because I think I do know quite a bit about this one. It's been a long time since I've read this again. I loved the basic principles of literature and all the stuff Ayn Rand said. As I've read so much of the canonical works, have a little bit different approach or view than Ayn Rand does, I think. So I'm excited to kind of delve into this. And we'll, maybe as I'm reading it again, I'll see, like I'm seeing here, Ayn Rand has a specific purpose, and that we have to always keep that in mind when we're reading her work. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to 2 weeks. I think it's 2 weeks from now.